Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've decided to have yet another look at some video game history, and in the process answer the question, what exactly made Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest great? First released all the way back in 1995 exclusively for the SNES as the second entry in the Donkey Kong Country series, with a later port to the Game Boy Advance in 2004, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest is widely considered to be the best of the original trilogy of Donkey Kong Country games. It is a truly beloved title that has stood the test of time, but to understand why this is the case, let's talk about what exactly made the game great. And the first thing that helped make the game great was how it mixed up the formula of Donkey Kong Country by emphasizing much more on exploration than the previous game had. Now, don't get me wrong, exploration was still a part of the original Donkey Kong Country, and was a good way to get extra lives, for example, as well as enjoy the odd minigame, but it is very safe to say that this was significantly built upon in the case of Donkey Kong Country 2, with the minigame offering up various tokens that were outright necessary to fully completing the game. What with the Lost World part of the game being locked behind you having enough tokens to unlock it level by level. So the need to explore was definitely there for players, and thankfully, due to the level design, in general there were more opportunities to explore and the player was rewarded more for doing so. This was also done to make the Donkey Kong Country 2 levels stand out much more in comparison to the original Donkey Kong Country levels. That way players didn't feel like they were going through the exact same game all over again. Speaking of which, I need to bring up another thing that helped make the game great. Dixie Kong, the character that came on to be Diddy Kong's sidekick during the story, who quickly became a fan favorite in this game for very good reason. Her ability to use her ponytail to basically act as a helicopter glider made her an absolute blast to play, as well as allowed her to utterly dominate when it came to aerial maneuverability. Diddy Kong is still a faster character, and thus he is able to carve out his own niche, and you are expected to use these two characters to the best of their abilities to find all the secrets. But yeah, it's difficult to argue against maining Dixie Kong for most of the game, which you probably are seeing me do in the background footage. But believe it or not, there is another character in this game that deserves special mention for helping make it great. Another character that can rival Dixie Kong for his sheer amount of utility, Squidder the Spider, who is one of the new animal buddies that notably has the ability to create his own platforms thanks to his ability to shoot webs, as well as giving himself a ranged attack option. Considering the fact that you can also direct these webs upwards or downwards at an angle, this means you could basically cheese entire levels if you really wanted by simply placing platforms over all the rough spots and completely ignoring them, except for the fact that those secrets that exist within the game are definitely going to entice you to go back down and actually play the game proper, even with Squidder the Spider. Point is, Squidder the Spider gives the player a great amount of freedom and more opportunities to explore in a game that is absolutely built around the player doing exactly that. So this is an excellent example of the new abilities keeping pace with the new and improved level design. But I do believe there is one additional facet that needs to be brought up whenever discussing Donkey Kong Country 2 with regards to what exactly made it great: the soundtrack. It is quite safe to say that Donkey Kong Country 2 has one of the best soundtracks ever put into a video game, period. And while I'm not sure that there's any single song that is as iconic within it as Aquatic Ambience was from the first game, it does have several that get close. Very close. With songs like Forest Interlude, Mining Melancholy, Sticker Brush Symphony, Lockjaw Saga, and Jib Jig all being thoroughly ingrained into the minds of anyone who played this game for very good reason. These are songs that will get stuck in your head and will make you love every bit of that memory. So while it is debatable as to whether or not any individual song in Donkey Kong Country 2 is quite as iconic as Aquatic Ambience, overall the soundtrack itself as a whole has many more songs that get very close to that level in comparison to what the original Donkey Kong Country had on average. And the original Donkey Kong Country had a great soundtrack, again with Aquatic Ambience being the highlight of it. But overall, in comparison between these two games, on average, Donkey Kong Country 2 does have the better soundtrack overall. So to summarize, Donkey Kong Country 2 is very much a game that greatly expanded upon the level design of the original, with a greater emphasis on exploration and rewarding the player for doing so, as well as gave the player significantly more options to explore with, thanks to the abilities of both Dixie Kong as well as Squidder the Spider, and had an absolutely stellar soundtrack that has gone down in history as one of the greatest of all time, a soundtrack that composer David Wise has every reason to be proud of. And this is on top of the other things that came from the original Donkey Kong Country, what with the graphics and animation work in particular still being utterly phenomenal on the SNES, as well as the game being an absolute blast to play with excellent controls. It should come as absolutely no surprise then that this game was an absolute bestseller on the SNES, even managing to outsell Super Mario World 2 in the long run. Yes, you heard that correctly, this was a game that did so phenomenally well that it even beat Mario on his own home console. At least if we're talking about Super Mario World 2, which came out the same year as Donkey Kong Country 2. This game was a major factor in the SNES staying somewhat relevant in 1995, at a time when it was having to compete with Sony's PlayStation 1, a system that was a full console generation ahead of the SNES. And more importantly, this game was able to pull that off at a time when the video game industry was seeing some of the greatest changes from a technical standpoint in its entire history. That this game managed to achieve such feats under such extreme circumstances, the fact that it actively outperformed the Mario game that came out on the SNES from that year, and the fact that it helped keep the SNES in general relevant, at least for a time in the face of the PS1, that surely has to count as another thing that helped make the game great. Another testament to how important this game is in the annals of video game history. With all of this in mind, this has been Ace, and I hope you'll agree when I say that Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, is great.